enjoying the talk so far. As you can see, I have my tweet deck running in the background. Those of you following along via the back channel, the hashtag we're using here is MSU WebDev. I won't have, obviously, time to stop and answer those while I'm presenting here, but hopefully if I see your question, I can at least try to address it as I'm talking along here. I was informed, as I was working on this presentation, that there's an unwritten law that all conferences must have at least one reference to Dr. Strangelove. Isn't that correct, Mike? So I decided to go with the appropriate subtitle of Or How I Stopped Worrying and Came to Love the Atomic Commit. And there we have it. The history of Subversion was founded in the year 2000 by CollabNet. They were looking to improve CVS. As you just heard Elizabeth talking, there's at least a few things that CVS leaves to be desired. Not saying that Subversion doesn't have a few, but it at least has a few less than CVS does. In 2001, the people writing Subversion felt that it was stable enough to start hosting its own source code. So that was easy enough for them to go ahead and do, and they started doing that. They released version 1.0.0 in 2004. I never personally trust version 1 releases of anything, but apparently if it takes you 3 years to reach version 1, I might think that your product might actually be decent. It became a top-level Apache project in 2010, which means that, that big software behemoth Apache, they may have written a web server that you may be using in your offices. They're providing direct support and direct maintenance on Subversion, and they're really pouring a lot of their efforts into that now. The current version of Subversion has now moved along to 1.6 and change. 1.7 is currently in beta 3 and promises a whole lot of speed improvements, although I haven't had a chance to actually test that out because it does require both server and client to be updated, and that's a lot of mess. Oh yes, by the way, throughout my presentation here I have scattered movie posters. I'm not going to be making a big deal about them, but you may attempt to guess amongst yourselves quietly to your neighbors what movie poster might be appearing next on any given slide. They'll appear at the end of slides so that you have the duration of the slide to figure it out. Server and clients. For the Subversion model, this is a centralized version control system, so you need some sort of server in place. Obviously, because this is an Apache project, usually that does mean Apache. Theoretically, you can run Subversion on IIS. I don't know why you would. It's very easy to run even on Windows with Apache Server. I was able to set a installation of Subversion up on my laptop here in about 5 minutes this morning, just in case something went wrong. I didn't have Wi-Fi. I wanted to still be able to do this presentation. Clients connect to Subversion usually over the HTTPS protocol. You can optionally instead use file:, which does let you do this over a network LAN if for some reason you don't have a web server available. And you can use the custom SVN protocol, although really all these things are just making it harder because everybody speaks HTTP. And most firewalls speak HTTP quite well, and most network administrators say, yeah, sure, you want to have a web server? We'll let you have a web server. You want to open port 12345? Get out of here. Put port 80, port 443, we don't have any problem with that. The server and most clients are open source for Subversion. There are some closed source commercial clients. I don't really know what they have to offer because I wouldn't use them. I mean, there's a free, very good open source alternative. I don't know what on earth you're offering that makes me want to pay for your product. Those of you who are tech junkies and code monkeys, nerds of some sort, you prefer working from the command line, you can certainly do that. Tortoise SVN is the popular Windows wrapper, SVN standing for Subversion. You'll see that abbreviation throughout the presentation. There are plugins for Visual Studio, for Dreamweaver, for Eclipse, and a lot of other IDEs available to make it very easy to simply work with Subversion without having to leave your familiar development environment. And the poster of choice here, the client. During this presentation, Carl Raymond will be working on some tasks for me. He'll be demonstrating what happens. He'll represent one developer working on a project. I'll represent another developer working on the project at the same time. I'll be making simultaneous changes with him. These tasks hopefully mimic situations that would occur in everyday work. Obviously, they've been simplified grossly, but they should be sufficient to show what I hope to. After we're done with the task, I will recap what we did and what problems, if any, we ran into, maybe how we fixed those. And some of these tasks you saw Elizabeth do. Go ahead and get started whenever. And some of these tasks, hopefully, the guys going after me will handle as well. Hosting options for Subversion. Free hosting is available on Google Code. However, that's not one of the options we have with our MSU accounts, so you'll need your existing Gmail accounts, which you all have anyway. SourceForge.net, free SVN hosting there. Again, both of those require open source. ProjectLocker.com lets you have closed source code. 3 accounts and 3 projects up to 300 megabytes is free. If you need more than that, you can pay for it. Now, if you're just talking simple, small text code files, that gets you pretty far if you have a small office, 3 accounts and 3 projects. If you start including artwork, Photoshop files, obviously you're going to eat in 300 megabytes very fast. But a simple C#, PHP, JavaScript file, you can get quite a bit of mileage on that one. Rolling your own. Of course, nothing is free. Labor does cost something. They keep telling me that. Apache bundles runs easily on Windows or Linux server. Like I said, I was able to set this up in 5 minutes. If you have an existing testing server somewhere that's running Apache, you might be able to just drop Subversion onto that with minimal extra effort on your part. Notable features. The atomic tree level commits, and hence the subtitle. No corrupt repository inconsistent state. Everything that you commit, all the files that you changed, so I changed files 1, file 2, I added an image that file 2 is linking to, I renamed file 3, all this stuff is committed in one atomic transaction. Either the whole set of changes goes through, or the whole set of changes fails. If it's working partway through and the connection is interrupted or something like that were to happen, it runs into a conflict, it will roll back the transaction automatically and not flush it out. As mentioned earlier, the HTTPS protocol was a huge advantage over CVS, makes it very easy to work through your firewalls. And now we have file renames. We keep your history when you rename your file. The file rename is not perfect because behind the scenes what it's doing is doing a copying the history and then deleting, and there are some minor problems with that, especially as we get into merges. But it's still better than not having any history at all attached to your file, which is the CVS alternative. The interface for this, and don't worry, I'm getting back to task 1 in just a minute. Those of you who prefer the command line, simple commands. SVN up runs an update, pulls down changes from the server. SVI CI for commit. I forget, CO is checkout. That's why they couldn't use CO. -M adds a message to the commit that lets us see, okay, this is what I changed in this revision. I'm adding just a free text note that explains what this change was about. SVN add foo.html. I'm going to start tracking changes to foo. And SVN blame is a great feature. SVN blame lets you see for each line of a given file who made the last change to the file. Lets you know exactly where to pin. Aha, that's why that function's not working anymore. It's because Joe changed it. I'm going to blame Mike because Mike's not here. Tortoise SVN for Windows is a great GUI. I'll be using it throughout this demo. It replicates all the features of the command line. I have personally never needed to use the command line on Windows. The recap for task 1. The scenarios, we started with revision 1 of a simple site, more like revision 15 because it took me that long to get this ready. Person A, which is Carl Raymond, modifies hello-world.html, and he changes an H1 to correct a typo, and he checks it in. Me, on the other hand, I'm going to add an extra paragraph at the end and check it in. I do have that right, hopefully. As before, you saw Elizabeth's file, my file, identical, funny enough. Even the best of us make typos there, so there's the typo that's being corrected. And I'm going to head over to my little text editor here, Notepad+, and add my paragraph that says, I forget what it's supposed to say, but I'm just going to say, hello, everyone watching remotely. Save my file. I can head over to Windows Explorer. Tortoise SVN provides a little overlay. I know it's going to be a little hard to see back there, but there's a little icon there that you can possibly see if you can't make it out, but it's at least different. And that tells me that I've got local changes to that file that I need to check in. So I'm going to right-click on my files, and I can do SVN commit. Provide a little message here that says added welcome message. I'm going to try to commit. And I get this nice little error message, which you probably can't read, but that's okay because I have it on my slides here. Oh yes, that's what I was supposed to change. I was supposed to add, this is my first page. Well, that didn't happen. The error message here hopefully is a little bit bigger, a little bit easier for you to read. What it says is commit failed, file or directory hello world is out of date, try updating. Resource out of date, try updating. Yes, Tortoise likes to repeat itself occasionally. But if I follow those instructions, it says, okay, go ahead and try updating. Basically, it's saying your file is out of date. Somebody else has been working on this. Somebody has made changes to this while you were not paying attention. So I'm going to do an SVN update. And wow, that actually caused a conflict. That wasn't supposed to cause a conflict. But hey, this is why we have live demos. Let's see what it did. I can right-click on the file and Tortoise SVN, edit conflicts, and apparently I was supposed to correct the typo and Carl was supposed to add the paragraph, and that's what happens when I don't read my own instructions. So I can simply revert the change. As a bonus, you get to see what happens when I revert the changes. And when I revert the changes, and I pull this up in Notepad+ again, I actually see that the changes are consistent with what Carl has already checked in, because it has reverted back to the most recent copy that was checked into the server. Had we made a non-conflicting change, which, why don't you go ahead and add a second paragraph, Carl, and check it in.
To the first file?
Yes, to the first file. And yes, Mike, I know you can still hear me. So now I have fixed the typo in the H1. I have saved my file. I'm going to stall for just a second while Carl commits his file with a non-conflicting change this time. Okay, you've committed. I will now attempt to commit my file. I have previously entered log messages. Tortoise remembers my previous log messages. So I'm going to say the same thing I said last time. I get the same error as before because my file is still out of date. That hasn't been magically fixed. This time when I try updating it, hopefully it will work better. Aha! What you cannot see in the background is that it has merged my file automatically. Where CVS requires manual intervention here, because the changes are non-conflicting, Carl's new paragraph, which says the rain in Spain falls mainly in the plain, has been added alongside of my typo correction. Because they occurred on different lines of the file, Subversion was able to merge the changes automatically. Just like CVS, Subversion automatically blocks out-of-date commits. You saw that twice. Prevents an inconsistent change where someone else might be losing their changes otherwise. The solution is, of course, always to just run your update command. You should always run the update command before you start working and when you're ready to check in your files again to make, and if there are changes, of course, if you're really being very diligent, after you update every time you test your code again to make sure that the other changes that have just come down don't break your new code. The first person changes merged in without problems, at least they are when you pay attention to the demo. And I can now commit these changes too. Tagging. And Carl, you can go ahead and do task 2 whenever you're ready. Tag is an alias for a particular revision. For example, release 1.0, release 2.0, stable. These are all sorts of different tags you can create. Subversion makes very cheap both time and disk server-side copies using symbolic links. So you can create tons and tons of tags for very little cost, very little overhead on the server. The downside, in Subversion, tags look exactly like folders. And there's nothing except convention stopping you from changing an existing tag. So I could go back to that tag, release 1.0, 3 years after the fact, and make an accidental change to it. Now, Tortoise, at least, and other clients are pretty smart about this, and if they see that /tags somewhere in your path of the commit file, they will warn you that says, hey, you're trying to change a tag. Is that really what you wanted to do? But that doesn't stop it from happening if you're deliberately trying to. Branching and merging uses the same ideas of cheap copies. At least branching does. Merging, of course, can't use a cheap copy. If you use your client side to make a merge, or to make a branch, that is, you can easily change your working copy over to the branch. This is, of course, free because all you're doing is changing the pointer to, okay, when I'm going to commit these files or update them, the server address has changed to whatever I said the new branch address is. The downside of doing that is that you can't easily continue your work on trunk. If you're trying to work on both trunk, because, say, trunk has your current release and branch has a new feature you're trying to add, and is going to break trunk if you add it right now, then you're going to need to have 2 copies and check out the additional branch, which could be a time and disk cost for your local machine. Now, disk cost usually isn't much until you have, multi-gigabyte project because you actually checked out all the artwork a second time. When you merge, Subversion will automatically record the metadata about the merged revisions. This was a huge improvement in Subversion 1.5 that helps block accidental double merges. It's not perfect, but branching in Subversion is better than it used to be. And I realize you won't be able to read the fonts in the back, but the color scheme was not my choice. Blame Wikimedia for that one. The green lines in the middle represent the trunk. The yellow lines you can see, the yellow boxes represent branches that have been made. Branch 7 there actually comes directly off a blue box, which is a tag. So you don't have to branch off trunk. You can branch off a tag if you prefer. You can even branch off another branch, although there's no examples of this, and I think that would be pretty bad practice in most cases. The red arrows represent merging back from your branch into trunk or from trunk up into your branch. You can see there around 10, 11, and 12. Right, so what they did was they had some changes on their branch. They merged the changes that had been happening in parallel on trunk up into their branch, and then merged all those changes together back into the trunk. They tagged that, and up at 15 and 16 they decided that we started something and funding ran out, time ran out, and we're just going to leave that alone. They're not going to continue with that. And there's no harm in that with Subversion. You can delete the branch at whim or leave it alone for future posterity to laugh at you. Task 2. We're going to start again from the same revision using Hello World 2 this time. And which of these did you actually do, Carl?
Task 2 is committed.
Task 2 is committed. But are you B here or A? Just so I know which one of these tasks to do.
I changed the H1 to read Hello WebDevcafe.
Okay, so you are doing A here. All right, so I will be doing the B task in Hello World 2. Yes, Mike, please drop your 87 gigabyte PSD files into my project. That would make my day. I'm going to change the H1 here to say Hello East Lansing. That's the only change I'm going to make here. I'm going to save the file. I'm going to commit that change. And again, the file is out of date. Just like last time, the file is out of date. And if I try to update the file, that really merged. Okay, this whole demo is just going backwards, but let's see what changed. Ah, you changed the title, not the H1. This one's on Carl, the other Carl. Well, there you go, an example of a non-conflicting change working perfectly the first time.
Actually, it's a good example of a semantic conflict. There was no text that was conflicting, but I changed the title, he changed the heading, and now they don't match anymore.
It's true, but Subversion handles it automatically. What it is, as he says, a semantic conflict. The meaning of the file here is inconsistent, and the accessibility people will have my hide for having a title which doesn't match the H1 on the page. Fortunately, I don't know anyone like that, so we should be all good.
The lesson here being, if you had to do an update, take a look at everything, because maybe there's something like that going on.
So what you saw, actually, this is more result in task 1. What you saw was that conflicting changes require special attention. When you run SVN update, Subversion marks the file in conflict. Subversion will block you from committing changes while a file is in conflict. I can't take that local file and just say, just go shove that up there. Subversion will take care of that for you and just block it. What you get is when two people change the same part of the file differently, you have a conflict. My example here uses tortoise merge. Your IDE may have its own merge tool or may hook into tortoise merge. You get a side-by-side view of the files with the merge result at bottom. The color coding is not particularly important. For each conflict, you need to decide whether you're going to use mine, theirs, or one of the blocks before the other, and then mark the conflict resolved. Since I no longer have a file in conflict, you'll have to do with this static demo. But basically, you can see on the left is theirs, which is the copy that came down from the server. On the right is mine, which is the file you were working on. And down below is where it attempted to merge. And what you can't really see very well, but there's a big red line in the middle there that's just filled with a bunch of question marks. And those two lines that match it are highlighted in red on the left and right-hand panes above. What I would do is I would right-click there and select Use Mine to keep the line that says Hello East Lansing, or keep theirs to use the line that says Hello WebDevcafe. Tree conflicts, and go ahead with task 3. Tree conflicts are common when you are branching or when you're handling renames. As I mentioned before, Subversion's handling of renames, while vastly improved over CVS because it does keep your history, it is still fundamentally flawed because it doesn't keep a true history of the file. If you look at the current revision, there's no record that the old file is there. So person A, hopefully that's Carl, is renaming hello world to index.html because every site should have an index.html. B, that's me, meanwhile, has edited hello world.html. So I'm going to go edit. And this should be done on hello world 3. This is my third page. And come back to that in a second. Avoiding tree conflicts can happen if you commit often, if you use a working or a trunk branch while keeping a stable branch. All of these are just simply strategies for avoiding. None of these will guarantee complete avoidance, but all of these will help. Long-term branches. Merge your changes in from trunk often. Every day is recommended. If you're going to be working on a new feature and that's going to break trunk because you're doing some major code refactoring, you're changing your authentication system, something where you can't just finish this off in a hurry, you need to create a branch for that. But in the meantime, there could be changes going on trunk, minor bug fixes, content updates if you're not using some sort of CMS, even just a minor typo fix. You need to be sure you're merging those changes from trunk back to your branch on a regular basis. The best way to handle renames, sadly, is to ask everyone to commit first, including all branches. This, of course, is going to work best in a very small shop. Do all the renames that you're going to do and commit your changes. Then everyone can update the changes you've pulled down. No one has to worry about, you renamed my file while I have changes to it, because you couldn't have changes. You committed all of them, right? And that's especially there for Brad, who specifically asked that I include a Battlefield Earth poster, even though it really has nothing at all to do with avoiding tree conflicts. The argument being perhaps avoiding conflict. Okay, so the recap was exactly as discussed. There was an incoming rename with local changes. So let's see what happens. I commit my file, text change. And I was able to commit that because you changed a different file?
I changed Hello World 3
Uh-huh.
to index.html, and I committed it. I get the little green icon.
Ah, I know why. I know why. Now what happens when I do an update? Nothing. Well, this is what happens when you don't have time to rehearse. Well, next time I will have more time to rehearse, maybe. Maybe. There is no easy solution to tree conflicts. And this whole long story short, this tree conflict problem happens, like I said, because there's been a rename and there's been incoming local changes.
I got the icon.
You got the icon. Try to do an update on your end.
All right.
This is supposedly being improved in Subversion 1.8. But this has been a known issue. Someone opened a bug report on this in 2002. So apparently it's a very difficult bug to fix. But Subversion 1.7 is laying the groundwork that they need to be able to potentially fix this in 1.8.
Okay, I've got the tree conflict over there.
You've got the tree conflict. That's great. Conclusions here. Subversion is a pretty simple, easy-to-use tool for basic version control needs. For a small number of developers outfit with minimal need for branching, it can completely meet your needs. A low developer count will reduce the frequency of simultaneous changes. If there's only 2 people ever working, the odds that they're changing the exact same parts of the file or the exact file at the same time, pretty small. Merging works well enough as long as you're careful. There's some disclaimers in there. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it. Subversion merging is tricky. If you have a lot of people working simultaneously or you have long-term branches, you can rapidly get into trouble with the merging. It's still a vast improvement over its predecessors and still a very popular choice today. The Apache project, Ruby, and Mono are all hosted on Subversion code bases. And I am out of time. My references here recommend any of these tools for your use if you're interested in Subversion.